Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. I'm your host, Marcus Udokang. It's a show where we chat about business analysis and project management issues and the challenges and triumphs within those fields. It's inspiring, informative, and very much inquisitive. My guest today has a long experience as a business analyst and project manager. He's also an aspiring and successful entrepreneur. He is founder and CEO of Fund Elements. Please help me welcome to today's show, joining us all the way from Dublin, Ireland, Alan Berry. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for that introduction.
Well, you're very much welcome. Now, I perhaps should start off with the most obvious of all questions. How and why did you get into project management and business analysis?
Yeah, I have to go back in time really to start in an organization many years ago, 1986. That's a long time ago. And basically received about 2 years into the start of my career a IBM PS2, and it was one of only two PCs in the organization. It had floppy disks, it had DOS prompt, and I remember a software package called Windows arriving along a number of years later. And we used one product, Lotus 123, to do bank account reconciliation. So we were able to tap in both sides of the accounting and the bank. And we had a keystroke macro to run reconciliations, and it gave us the results. So it was a bit of magic, and it helped us to do things quicker. And I progressed from there. I went on to work with a number of database packages. We got Windows, so got familiar with the Windows suite, particularly with Microsoft Access. And then I moved to London in 1995. During the 4 or 5 years I lived in London, I learned a huge amount, and migrated on to working with property network systems, systems supported by IT departments and big databases. Sybase, for example, would have been the database at the time, and got a lot of experience and a lot of good training in that area. And then it was a natural progression, I suppose, into, instead of working and building systems, into actually becoming more of an analyst and a project manager. And the background I had a background in, I'm an accountant. Accountants were one of the early users of PCs, and that's kind of where I got to today, was just a progression throughout my career, being inquisitive, asking about, well, what's the next step, what happens next, and asking a lot of questions, why. So just following that.
Fantastic. You've got this company, Fund Elements. What kind of services does Fund Elements provide?
Yeah, Fund Elements is an opportunity which is quite interesting, because it's an opportunity built on cloud. So cloud, I would see as being another phase in the development of technology, which just creates a whole new set of opportunities, many ways to put everything back together again. If I look at the business of an investment fund, it's typically a business where much of the operations are outsourced. So prior to cloud, every operating silo, every outsourced silo built systems based on on-premise solutions. Cloud reinvents that. It gives the opportunity for all of those systems to now move into a single operating platform, technology platform, and it gives the opportunity for businesses to really convert from providing services to providing solutions. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and the great news about it is we're only at the beginning of it. So what I've done is really taken a lot of the knowledge and experience that I've had working in that industry over probably 3 decades, and started documenting it in a way that makes it accessible and makes it easier for people to run technology and training projects.
That's fantastic. You talked about the investment fund business, and part of that that you focus on is called operating models. Can you provide maybe a brief understanding of what an operating model is, and why it's so important for every investment fund business?
Yeah, so there's a life cycle to every investment fund. There's a day that you decide to open the fund, and there's a day that you decide to close the fund. And between those 2 points, you've got a lot of activity, a lot of decisions. At the initial stage, there's a lot of identify decisions. So identify domicile, identify legal structure, identify fund structure, identify investment policy. So there's a lot of decision making up front. But then throughout it, there's a lot of other actions, a lot of other calculations, calculate settlement value, calculate market value, right the way through to the reporting piece, looking at the filing of tax returns for investors, looking at the financial reporting, the regulatory reporting. So within an operating model, we look at 12 areas that are common to all funds. We look at the consistent or the constant processes, the things that everyone does. And we also look at the choices they make, the variables associated with each process. And it's very much built with the end client in mind on a life cycle basis. And it also applies object-oriented type design approach where you're separating the parameters from the actual actions that carry out those parameters.
Fantastic. One thing I've been meaning to ask you, I know you worked with State Street, and I had a friend who worked at State Street in Krakow. Believe it or not, there are a lot of Irish people who go to Krakow to work for State Street. I don't know why, but that's the way it worked out. So I thought I'd ask you, how was your experience working as a project manager at State Street? And any good takeaways for us?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because a lot of my interaction was with Krakow. I would have dealt with them on a regular basis, and State Street have had a very good, successful operation in Poland. So my interaction was primarily with their businesses in Dublin, Kilkenny, in Luxembourg, in Frankfurt, and a lot of the the operations team was in Poland. So yeah, very good experience, very diverse set of people. And but I suppose the one thing that I've always enjoyed in the projects and the areas I've worked in, lots of complexities, lots of things to figure out and people to work with to try and get your head around some of the challenges that the business face.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was. It's such a beautiful place to work too. You could just go out to the canal and have a coffee if you want and go back to work. Because I think State Street was. I've been there in that office. I think it was located right downtown near the Kashimish Jewish Kashimish district, I think. So
I didn't get to visit, which
okay.
was unfortunate. But it is, irrespective of from a work point of view, it is a place I'd like to visit. I have been to Poland. I did get to go to Gdansk and traveled around a couple of areas. Fascinating city, Gdansk, and lots of history.
Fantastic. Now you worked as a director of operations at the CITCO Group. How was the experience leading the implementation of the global HR transformation project there?
Yeah, that was I learned a lot on that project. The one thing that we did have on that project is we got the balance right between the implementation team. So with an ERP type implementation, you typically have 3 project managers. You've got a business project manager, someone who's facing off and working with the HR function and the operational people. You've got a technology project manager, someone who is looking at the technology implementation. That was an on-premise solution, so you are reliant on them to build a service, to implement the software, and to work on any data loads and any custom work. And then I think the other element, the third part to it, was working with a consulting firm, which was a very, very good experience. We worked with a consulting firm called K-Base. They've since been bought out by another consulting business, but the experience they brought to bear was excellent. And that's the one thing that I would highlight about running a successful ERP implementation. All that K-Base had done for 20 years before we hired them was implement Oracle. They had 200 people doing that. They had a deep level of expertise in that space. So that was quite easy to get guidance around. We did have a red flag approach where if we decided we wanted to do something, we were very open with them about it. And if they felt that it was something that they would, I told you so 3 months later, we wanted to know about that straight away. So it worked quite well. I learned a lot, and I'll mention John Kirkconnell, who was the project manager I faced off against with K-Base. He had a lot of knowledge, and I learned a lot from him. He knew his stuff, and he's still working in this space. So yeah, it was a very good project. We did manage to deliver on time, on budget, within scope, with a big bang implementation. I think it was 5,500 people in 45 offices. So that was a lot of work by a team of 30 people. And in particular, the data piece was where we resourced up. And we had some excellent people working on that who led that initiative.
Fantastic. Now, at CITCO also, you led this global training and development team. I've done a bit of training myself, also been a bit of business analyst, which interests me. So are there many similarities between, say, the role of a trainer and that of a business analyst?
Yeah, I think, again, I learned a lot. And what was interesting was that I came across some excellent resources, and they're actually from the Canadian Society for Training and Development, and some excellent trainers who are based in our Toronto office. What I learned, I actually learned a lot about business analysis and business analysts, the role of a business analyst, from the structures that are available through learning and development competencies. I would say that trainers are actually business analysts. There's a couple of things I would mention which are worth looking at. Within the training world, there's a concept of behavior standard condition, and that works very well within the business analyst world as well. Big thing I always struggled with as a business analyst was it felt like an endless task. It felt like a project where if you'd written a long functional specification, well, there's a good chance it's probably not going to get read by too many people. So you never knew when you were finished. What I found with the combination of the methodologies from L&D and universal process notation, which is the methodology I use as a business analyst, is they were highly complementary. And it actually got to the point where I recognized that there was an end goal. There was something you're looking for as a business analyst. And that's been, it was a light bulb moment. And there was a lot of frustration in trying to get that complete view of I'm now finished and the functional specification is ready. So that was quite a light bulb moment for me, was when I sort of said, these two things are the same thing. And that's a key part of what Fun Elements is about, is getting that to a point of completion where you say, yep, that's fine, we're now done.
Nice, fabulous. In the case of business analysis, if we look at, say, process decomposition, that's deciding, if the specification is complete, is really sort of qualitative rather than quantitative. And you've developed a training course in the area called Business Analysis Essentials, the Complete Functional Definition. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that course.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what I've introduced in the answer to the last question. It's about taking the approach using UPN, Universal Process Notation, of breaking down from a strategy or a governance view of an organization, breaking it down into its functional components, and then continuing to break it down. And I suppose the main teaching point in that is that there is actually something you're looking for, and you do get to an evaluation which is objectively based to say, okay, that's now done. It's what I call, or what I learned a long time ago, is defined as an elementary process. And an elementary process is very simple. It's one you can't decompose any further. And when you get to that stage, you then are at a point where you're now ready for automation. You're now ready to train people. And in many ways, all you have to do is add the business logic and the data required by that business logic to that definition. And then you're good to go. And this, I think, is one of the key problems between technology teams and business teams, is whether it's waterfall or agile, at the end of the day, we need great systems, we need great documentation as well. And I think this methodology and that approach gets you to a point of saying, actually, it's more about a focused time piece of work, and we can get to that outcome where everyone's on the same page, both the technology teams and the business teams.
Fantastic. You mentioned a bit about cloud computing and being somewhat revolutionary in the business world and technology world. What's your perspective of cloud computing and how it's really enabled us to approach sort of business analysis as a service?
Yeah, it's the one thing I would say about cloud computing is we're still very much at the beginning of cloud computing. What I mean by that is that what we have at the moment is an explosion of apps. but we don't necessarily have the technology platforms to run those apps. They do exist in some places. Salesforce is probably the most mature technology platform. But if you actually look at other platforms, they're still very immature. So what we need and what we will have is we will have technology platforms which have core services, and then we will have apps that run on those platforms. And what I think will win out, which is why Fund Elements is an area of focus for me, is if we think of the silo approach, the apps were never designed to run together. They were always designed with a certain scope. While with the cloud, you can run apps which are customer centric, all designed to work together, where the interfaces are clearly designed. We do have APIs at the moment, but the API is only as good as the data that's available in each app. So we can transfer data quite seamlessly, but it's the data gaps, it's the areas that aren't in the transaction processing systems that the analytical systems need. That's the area where I think you're going to see a huge improvement over the next number of years. So definitely cloud computing. We're at the start of it, and there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, very much scalable, no doubt. Now, maybe you can explain to me a bit about issues and options that are available to boards of investment funds. I would like to know more a bit about investment funds, or boards of investment funds, I guess.
Yeah, we talked about silos and the interfaces between functional areas. I think one of the other big themes and big areas that is difficult at the moment are the interfaces that exist between the operations team, the management team, and the governance team. That's a real challenge. And again, I think cloud computing will enable a much better interaction, a much better way of challenging. At the moment, a lot of boards are very dependent upon documents as a way of gaining comfort about what is happening in the operations. A lot of the documents are not necessarily concise, and they're timely to read, to review. While what we're really trying to achieve with the governance team is we're trying to leverage the experience. Yes, there's a need for documents. There's also a need for insights, for people to be able to say, oh, there's an issue there, and to be able to quickly bring that to the experience of a board member who can prevent a problem. So what can happen with investment funds is that the time taken to investigate an issue where you want to position it correctly with management and the governance team takes so long that you've missed other things that needed to happen, such as maybe reporting it to the regulator. While if you engage that experience at an early point, okay, that's a little bit braver, but they may say, look, guys, let's forget about what happened. Because of what's happened, there are things we need to do, and then we need to figure out how it happened, and we need to quantify and make sure that we're reporting this correctly to all concerned. So often what happens when you get an incident is you get very focused on why it happened, rather than it's just happened, what do we need to do next? And in the end, you can end up with a bigger problem if you engaged early. So that I think is a good example of how cloud will break down the interfaces, allow board members to be able to dip into the operations and build more trust between the operations in a more transparent way of working together.
I like that transparency. Any advice for the aspiring business analysts, project managers, those wanting to get into business process? Any specific skills one should focus on? Any advice on how one can accomplish these? How one can get into these careers?
Yeah, and I suppose the advice I have would be for probably a generation like me. I mentioned that I got a PC at a certain point in my career, and I know there are people with huge domain expertise who don't necessarily have the technology skills, and the expertise is the important piece. The skills to be able to actually document that and to be able to become a business analyst. A lot of people in their later life, they decide they want to write a book. Well, I decided I wanted to build a operating model for investment funds. Difference, well, it's a lot of research-based work, so there's similarities. There's a lot more structure around building an operating model. And it's interesting work because it's complexity, and you're continuously lifting the lid and trying to figure things out. So I think if you have deep domain knowledge and you are looking for what to do next, having had, say, a 30-year career in any area of expertise, it's probably not a bad thing to look at, particularly with cloud capabilities coming along that allow you to distribute that knowledge. So rather than write a book, I would suggest maybe have a look at what a business analyst does and the opportunities are now available in cloud computing. So I see a bright future ahead for business analysts, and I think there's going to be a greater appreciation of the skills that learning and development professionals have. I think another area that I look at quite a bit is artificial intelligence, and you train AI, and that's an important word to remember. We have very skilled people in training, working in organizations. They train people at the moment, but there are opportunities coming downstream where I think that's a resource that people need to wake up to in terms of what they're achieving.
Yeah, fascinating. I was thinking, what a dramatic change from a 3.5 or 5.25 floppy disk to cloud computing. It seems it wasn't really that long ago, but it seems that it's a huge giant leap in a short period of time. At least that's how I see it.
I can remember before the computers got networked, and like we talk about agile, the IT department didn't know we had PCs. They were on mainframes. That was their job.
That's right.
I know we had mini computers, we had PCs, which we basically, when they were broken, we opened them up and see if we can fix them. And then I remember them being networked. I remember where we didn't have to hand the floppy disk across the desk anymore. Yeah. And of course, the floppy disks went from I can't remember the size, but they were 3.5 inch or 5 inch or something, and they got smaller into hard disks. And that's been fascinating to watch that whole progression, and it's just gotten better and better over time, and easier and easier. And I think the one thing I would say about cloud is I think there's a huge legacy that will disappear in the next 3 years. I think 2025 we'll see huge changes in how we run our operations.
No, I think so. Yeah, I remember working at IBM. We were using Token Ring, and we switched to TCP/IP. It was a huge thing. No, we don't want to go to TCP/IP. Leave that thing alone. And then we were forced to abandon Token Ring, which actually is quite good, and get into TCP/IP. Now, who knows? It's all about cloud. Forget TCP/IP. So dramatic change. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, fundelements.io. That's a good starting point. There's a member section on there. Happy to share content, business analysis, essentials, for example. I also recently worked on a job specification for a business analyst because I actually believe that space is very poorly served at the moment. And that's something I'd like to I think there's an opportunity to better define that role. We do have a lot of definition around the project manager role. We have methodologies, etc. We don't necessarily have that around the business analyst role. So we're looking to change that. But or alternatively, I'll be more than happy to comment when this is published, and you can contact me through LinkedIn.
Fantastic. That's great. Yeah, I think I was going to say quickly, I think the business analyst role really has a lot more maturity to go than, say, project management, which has been around for much longer, and it's a bit more established.
I think it's a role that's suffered from a lack of definition. I've seen people called business analysts who have business as usual roles, which is more business analysis and nothing to do with technology. So I think there's a need for a clear definition as to what the business skills, the business process modeling, facilitation skills, and the technology skills required for that role, and a better definition and education to support those type of roles. It's with the project management roles, we have PMI, we have IPMA, we have a number of methodologies, and we don't necessarily have those. We do have Lean, we have Six Sigma, but not hitting the real important points about technology business analysts. So that's an area that we're keen to bring a better definition to.
Fantastic. That sounds fabulous. I want to thank you very much, Alan, for joining us today. It's been extremely informative and, of course, very much inquisitive. And the audience most definitely can take away lots of information that you've given us. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus.
You're welcome. Have yourself a great day.
And you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
And now a word from our sponsors. The Lewis Institute provides an enterprise project management program that does more than just train PMs. It helps support them from the CEO level on down. These courses help certify project leaders and prepare them to pass the PMP exam. The Business Agility Institute provides Emergence, the Journal of Business Agility. This quarterly publication brings you inspiring stories from the most innovative companies. Use the promo code ANALYST to get a 10% discount on your annual subscription.